We go live now to Georgia, where we're joined by Professor Joshua Meddaugh, who's a political science department professor at the Clayton State University in Morrow, which is just south of Atlanta. He joins us via Skype. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. All eyes of America are on Georgia.
Indeed. Thanks for having me. Yeah, Georgia is the center of attention right now. Everyone's looking at Georgia trying to figure out what the future of America could really be. So we'll know more in the next 24 to 48 hours.
All right. So why is there a runoff, actually? What happened in November?
Okay, great question. So in the state of Georgia, as there are a lot of similar in a lot of southern states here in the United States, we have a policy that if one candidate doesn't get 50% of the vote plus one, so majority of the votes, there has to be a runoff of the top candidates. So there's a potential of majority rule or a plurality kind of argument to solidify who is the majority-ish choice. Most of these runoffs do tend to end with a majority candidate, somebody getting 50%, or a very large difference between the two candidates.
When we look at the results in the November time, Senator Purdue got 49.73%. I mean, you know, if I was a bookie and without everything that's happened around it, one would have thought that chances are that he'd get over the line. But so much has happened since then.
Right. That was a huge kind of situation that was going on here in Georgia. Everyone's eyes were focused, of course, on the presidential election and what was going on specifically in the county where our Clayton State University is in Clayton County, Georgia, which was the county that helped flip the state entirely blue. One of the side stories was the slide back of Purdue. He for a majority of the day was above that 50% threshold, but as the absentee ballots kind of came in and they overwhelmingly favored Democrats, the slide back happened in the 40s, which was a shock. Everyone knew that Warnock and Loeffler were heading to a runoff because of the multiple candidates. It was pretty shocking to the Purdue camp that they slid the way they did back under the threshold. And then since November, with the discussions of voter fraud, which are relatively unfounded, the lawsuits have been thrown out of the court system, and you name it, even to this discussion of the tape where the president called the Secretary of State here in Georgia and talking about a number of votes need to be found. It's been quite a situation here in Georgia. All eyes kind of looking at it, figuring out like what else can kind of happen. And if you are Purdue and Loeffler, you're nervous today. You're nervous at this hour, waiting for the polls to close.
All right. So talking about early voters, record numbers for a runoff have voted already. But on the day, it looks as if less people have turned out. What might that mean and translate to if we look at what happened in the November election?
Great question. So, yeah, if this follows exactly what happened in the general election in November, the absentee and early ballot voting overwhelmingly favored the Democratic candidates, and it was the same day voting on election day which surged the Republican vote. As we're seeing today, it's not the same level of in-person voting. So that if it's going to follow the same path it did in November, that's going to affect Republican numbers and Republican votes. And that's a warning sign. That is one of those troubling signs. A few minutes ago when I said the senators Loeffler and Purdue should be a little bit nervous, that is part of it, because we're seeing the same day vote slow, but there was a surge of early voting and absentee ballot, which overwhelmingly favored the Democrats in November.
I heard someone being asked about the tape, the conversation with the Secretary of State in Georgia with the president. And they were asking a Republican, and they said, look, will this hurt the chances for the Republican senators? And he says, look, it can't help them. And I just wonder how much of a factor it might be, because one gets a sense that if you're blue, you're going to vote blue no matter what. If you're red, you're going to vote red no matter what. But somehow they're not showing up. So maybe they have been affected.
I'm going to echo that statement too. It can't help. The Democrats, of course, it's just another drop in the bucket of things that the Democrats don't like against the current president. But for the Republicans, this is very interesting because there is a split here in this country. Some of these Trump voters are just that. They're Trump voters only. They support Donald Trump, not the Republican Party. So this could really kind of hurt that turnout of those people. Purdue and Loeffler tried to tie themselves to Donald Trump a lot to sway those voters. But as they're trying to get those Trump voters who are going to be fine with that statement, they don't really mind. But it does affect some of those moderate Republicans who it might just be a little bit too much now. And those are the ones who aren't showing up. And that really hurts. In political science, we call that a decline at the electorate, where when your party's just not energized to come vote for a candidate. And these little things can hurt. And in an election like this, where it's very close and we're talking about in the margin at polling, people not showing up, that could really turn the election for one side over the other.
There's no question that the Republican Party is fractured. We've got a situation tomorrow when the House and the Senate meet that you've got these Republicans who are still, to this day, going to fight for the president, even though everybody, the courts included, have said, listen, that race was done, Biden won, everybody should move on. This doesn't help the Republican Party, and I guess also this feeling feeds into this election that's taking place in Georgia today.
Right. It doesn't help the Republican Party. It doesn't help America. It doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help democracy. It's weird. And somebody who studies American government and politics and has a background in some history too, this is something that we're really interested with, by why these individuals are trying to make a ploy for voters who tend to only support the candidate and not the party. This Trumpism really supports Donald Trump and not the Republican Party. You have the one subsect saying, this is it, this is done. Biden won the election. The Republicans need to get in line and accept the results and move forward and work and potentially have a divided government and try to bring the party back together. But this is just fractionalizing the party more. And if you're a Democrat, you're kind of okay with it. Infighting does kind of help your side of the aisle, but it's not a good look for the Republican Party or for America right now.
How did Biden win Georgia? Is it the demographics that have changed, or was it a vote against Donald Trump?
Good question. Honestly, a major player that helped here in Georgia was Stacey Abrams, who had a failed gubernatorial run a couple of years ago. But she, over the last year, really focused on a get out the vote campaign in the urban areas in Atlanta and in Columbus and some of these larger city areas of Georgia, which are African-American population and had lower voter turnout. By spurring these areas that are overwhelmingly Democratic to turn out and vote, that's what really led to this election switching in favor of Biden and the Democrats. Because if you look at the population of this state, the population, as in many areas, it's in the cities, and it's growing more and more. Atlanta is a fast-growing city. It's a young city, and it has an overwhelming minority population that supports the Democrats. And that's really what switched this. And by Stacey Abrams doing a lot of the legwork and groundwork to turn out the vote, that's what really turned this on the head. It was kind of a perfect opportunity of years in the making. And over the last 5 to 10 years, you've been kind of seeing this slow shift that we call purple, like from a red to a blue state. So it's kind of getting purple. It just kind of seemed like the perfect storm and opportunity with the new individuals moving into the city over the last couple of years and voting switch the state. So if things like this continue, the demographic shift continues to happen like this, and age shift happens in Georgia, areas like Atlanta are going to be solidly blue, and that could really drive the state towards the Democratic Party every election.
If the Democrats do secure the Senate, and of course they already control the House, it will be a Democratic, I suppose, legislation, laws will be passed easily going forward. But what will that mean for the Republicans? I guess an autopsy will be required about how to move forward. And for those that have been coalescing around Donald Trump, would it be a question of, all right, that's the final message, Georgia has spoken, we need to take back our party from Donald Trump?
Well, we'll see. I mean, it would make sense intuitively. That makes sense. But Republicans here nationally win a lot of elections, and they did actually kind of well. They didn't win the presidency, but they picked up seats in the House during the general election. So there will be a look back of like, why do we lose these two seats? Is it just that we're losing a state? Do we need to focus more in the middle of the country where it's pretty rural? But there will be some of these individuals who will stay on kind of that Trumpism bandwagon and try to push the populist message. But I do think the Republican Party, with its leadership and the Senate Majority Leader McConnell, will try to bring people back in tow to the more conservative line that they've been holding since the 80s and try to regroup the party. But it might be a little too late, as you see Donald Trump Jr. and Eric and a few of Trump's kind of associates are positioning themselves for future electoral runs. The party might be fractionalized. They'd be smart, regardless of what happens this election, to really sit back and figure out where this party wants to go in the next 10, 20 years. But again, I think right now it's just waiting with bated breath to see what happens in these two Senate races.